only thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we burn, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. This is the intersection of faith and politics, and we appreciate you joining us today. You can visit us online as well at wallbuilderslive.com and wallbuilders.com. In fact, I want you to go to wallbuilderslive.com today so you can click on the link to sign up for the first ever WallBuilders Live webinar, which is going to be a chance for you to actually ask David Barton some questions on the webinar. And we're going to cover one of the hottest topics in America right now, and that is a convention of states. Should we have a convention of states? Should the states exercise their right under Article 5 in the Constitution to propose amendments that they would send back to the states for ratification? It's a big question. There's a lot of folks talking about it. There's a lot of good people on both sides of the argument, it seems like. And in fact, we're going to have today, we're going to share with you a panel where we hosted several folks on this subject that are right in the middle of this. And so we'll be sharing that with you today, tomorrow, and the next day. But go visit wallbuilderslive.com, click on the link for the live webinar where we're going to have special guest Mike Ferris with us on the webinar. And you'll be able to hear from David Barton and Mike Ferris and myself, Rick Green, on this issue of Article 5 in the Constitution. And you'll be able to ask questions that night as well. So check that out at wallbuilderslive.com. Click on the link and it'll give you the information. The event is actually going to take place on June 19th. So mark your calendar, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on June 19th. That's 9 out on the East Coast and 6 on the West Coast. We're trying to make it possible for as many of you to join us that night as possible. So check that out at the website, wallbuilderslive.com. Now for today and the next couple of days, we're going to share that panel with you. This actually took place at the Pro-Family Legislators Conference that we have every year in Dallas, a great opportunity for legislators to come together and exchange ideas. And this is a huge idea that they have been discussing, legislators from all across the country. And on that panel, we've got Mike Ferris from Homeschool Legal Defense and also conventionofstates.com. You can find out more at conventionofstates.com about their efforts he's going to talk about on the panel. We also have Senator Kevin Lundberg from Colorado. We heard from a lot of reps and senators there during the discussion, folks like Representative Gary Bands from Oklahoma and others, that at the time we had the panel, they were actually making plans to have what they called the Mount Vernon Conference, where they met at Mount Vernon a month later after this panel you're about to hear. And they had over 100 legislators show up at that to discuss and start planning and looking for ways to do this if it's going to go forward in a very organized fashion. So a lot of things have happened actually since this panel took place, but we wanted to start with this panel to give you a chance to engage in this concept and listen to these folks from across the nation and what they had to say about it. So let's go to the Pro-Family Legislators Conference for our Article 5 panel with Mike Ferris, Senator Lundberg, and others from across the country here on WallBuilders Live.
This is hard for me to admit, but it's actually an issue that I changed my position on. And I don't like to admit that because it makes me feel like John Kerry for just a moment. Because I was against it before I was for it, and actually I was neutral for a while. But honestly, what happened to me is the exact same thing that happened to Mark Levin. Mark talks about in his book, Liberty Amendments, I think he makes the argument for how we have to save our Constitution better than anybody else. And he makes the argument, as I used to say, he said he was not in favor of this because he was afraid of a runaway convention, because he didn't want to see a constitutional convention take place again. And then he said the more he read Article 5, he found there's no way to call for a constitutional convention in Article 5. You can't call for a constitutional convention in Article 5. You can only call for an Article 5 convention where you would propose amendments. You don't amend the Constitution at an Article 5 convention. You only propose amendments that would then go to the states to potentially be ratified and placed in the Constitution. So that caused him to look a little closer. If you listen to Mark Levin at all, you know he gets a little bit passionate. And he makes a great argument for the fact that we are at the point where the old methodology is not going to solve the problems that we're facing. We don't have time. and that the Founding Fathers gave us a solution in the Constitution for when our Congress was not responding to the people. And that's what happened to me. When I started teaching the Constitution around the country, I found when I would ask the question, how many of you in the room would be in favor of an Article 5 convention, out of 100, 200, 300 people, I would have 1 or 2 people say yes and everybody else say no. And then I would go through and begin to describe how it would actually work and what would actually happen. And I would point out that there's a few other people besides myself that are for an Article 5 convention, and I'd begin to read off names like Alexander Hamilton and George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and all the others that gave us the Constitution. They put it in there for a reason. And all it takes to prevent a runaway convention is 13 states. That's all you need. Okay? It only takes 13 states to prevent a bad amendment. We have a runaway Congress right now. If we could have a convention that would propose amendments, then we could actually have states have an opportunity to consider those amendments, and if they come out with something bad, if you did have a, quote, runaway convention, all you do is slap it down with 13 states saying no. Everybody always tells me, well, they're going to get rid of the Second Amendment. Friends, from Austin, Texas, I can throw a rock and hit 13 states that would say no to that. All right? It's not going to be that difficult to kill the bad amendment. So my position changed on it. In fact, David and I had a guest on probably 4 years ago on the radio program, started talking about this, and we realized, you know, all the people that are so afraid of having a convention are operating from a position of fear. Out of a position of fear, they're taking a tool out of the toolbox that the Founding Fathers gave to us. So this year we wanted to have an opportunity to talk about how this could happen, if it was to happen, and what some of the reasons might be to have an Article 5 convention. Kevin Lundberg is heading up the Article 5 caucus. If you haven't had a chance to check out that website, please do. He's going to talk about what he's doing there with the Article 5 caucus. And Mike Ferris, of course, as you know, from Homeschool Legal Defense, and Patrick Henry, one of the top 3 universities I always recommend students to attend from around the country, by the way, Mike. And, you know, I mentioned yesterday my Constitution class is a quick start guide. If you really want to dig deep and study the Constitution, you need to take Mike Ferris's online class on the Constitution. He goes way deeper than I do and does a fantastic job of really getting to a lot of the tough issues on the Constitution. And he also covers Article 5 convention. So I think Kevin's going to have some comments first, and then Mike, and then we've got a few other people that are going to say a few words, and then we'll open it up to questions. So, Senator, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rick. I appreciate it. In the next few minutes, we'll cover some very brief details of a very big subject that I actually am of the opinion may be the biggest political issue of possibly our lifetime. Because, as Rick said, Washington is out of control. The founders put in our Constitution the tools, or I should say the tool, for the states to take that control.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. At the time of the American Revolution, numerous other nations also had revolutions, yet 200 years later, America is the only of those nations still under its original form of government. Is this just good luck? Not according to Founding Father Benjamin Rush. He declared, "I do not believe that the Constitution was the offspring of inspiration, but I am as perfectly satisfied that it is as much the work of a divine providence as any of the miracles recorded in the Old and New Testament." George Washington agreed. In fact, he declared, "I should be pained to believe that the United States have forgotten that divine interposition which was so often manifested during our revolution, or that they fail to consider the omnipotence of that God who is alone able to protect them. Our founders acknowledged that our national success had come from God."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
If you look at that little quote that Alexander Hamilton, that I lifted from Federalist Paper number 85, I recommend you read that, because Hamilton is stating specifically that they wrote that into Article 5 just in case the federal government might get a little bit too big for itself. And it's up to the state legislatures to make the difference. Let me just give a couple of brief things on the front end, and then we'll move on to everything else we've got lined up here. One of which is, if I can give you an action item, it is this. If you have not joined the State Legislators Article 5 caucus, I urge you to to check it out and do so. It's very simple. It's online. It's a public record that you're in favor of two things. That is constitutional federalism, maintaining that balance between the state and the federal government, or I should say reestablishing it. And number two, controlling the runaway growth in Washington that we see today. We see Article 5 as being the main component, but the real goal is to reestablish that sense of federalism. I collected a few quotes from some of our previous speakers here that I think underscore the significance. General Boykin said the key is the state legislators. And he was speaking of a variety of reasons, but it's only if we have that authority. And if you know what I know, your state legislature is more the lapdog of Congress rather than a real deliberative body making the decisions for the people of your state. Senator Cruz, who had some interesting comments on Article 5 that I'm sure we'll discuss a little bit, nonetheless said the states are the solutions facing us today. John Fund, you're the people actually solving problems. Glenn Beck, it is time to dream big. Rabbi Lapin, we're defending civilization, and politics is the practical application of our deepest held values. Now, is Bob Ewan in the room here, Congressman Ewan? Oh, pity, because I have a couple of quotes from him, too. The first one that struck me was, happy as a pig in slop. Oh, that was his opening comment. But what he really said was, leadership makes a difference. And our president doesn't know who we are, and he's about to find out. I believe that we have an incredible tool that we have yet to really fully utilize, and if not now, probably never. So I'd urge you to think of it in those terms too. Very quick history on the caucus, the state legislators Article 5 caucus, and the website's at the bottom of the sheet, but it's article5caucus.com or article5caucus.com. We formed early this summer. First meeting we actually had physically was in Chicago following the ALEC conference. And then a week later, Levin's book came out, Liberty Amendments, that really supercharged the entire discussion. Much has happened since then. There are many different paths to take for an Article 5 convention. I should tell you that in the last month, both Michigan and Ohio, I believe it's their senates, have passed a resolution calling for a balanced budget amendment convention. And then on December 7th at Mount Vernon, there will be a meeting of state legislators as well. This isn't technically an Article 5 caucus event, but it's formed by those primarily within the caucus to discuss this issue. And at that particular location, it really adds the weight to the real issues that are before us. I say again, please, article5caucus.com, please sign up on that and join us, because we send out newsletter every 2 weeks to keep you posted, to keep you abreast of it, to keep us all informed and identified and standing together. Thank you very much. And Rick?
Thank you, Kevin. Mike Ferris, thank you very much for being with us. We're honored to have you. Y'all welcome Mike Ferris.
I'd like to ask a question as a point of personal privilege. How many legislators here were homeschooled? There's a lot of you. The left made its biggest mistake ever when it decided it would try to battle against the freedom of families to homeschool their kids. Because we came, we fought, we succeeded in legislative battles against all odds, and the families figured out this isn't the only fight that's important. And they've stayed around for a whole lot of other things.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Our founding fathers, despite their common love for America, did not always agree with each other in politics. Such was the case between John and Samuel Adams. John was the leader of the Federalist Party, and Samuel was the leader of the Anti-Federalist Party. Consequently, political disagreements were not unusual between these two. On October the 4th, 1790, Sam wrote John and told him, "Let ministers and philosophers, statesmen and patriots unite their endeavors to renovate the age by educating their little boys and girls and leading them in the study and practice of the exalted virtues of the Christian system." 2 weeks later, John wrote back and told Samuel that on this issue they both agreed. While these two prominent founding fathers disagreed on much, they both agreed on the importance of educating the next generation in the principles of Christianity.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
We're counting on a lot of people, including homeschoolers, in fighting this particular battle because, as you've been told by both Rick and by Kevin, if we're going to save this country, we've got to do it relatively soon because there's a combination of things that are coming at one time. The national debt is going to crush us. The national debt, the visible part of it is $17 trillion and growing. The invisible part, if they use regular business accounting, will be required to disclose, is north of $70 trillion. It may be as high as $100 trillion when you count in all of the Social Security, Medicaid, all of the liabilities that they have a moral responsibility to pay, but they don't carry on the books because they use phony accounting. If they use regular business accounting, they'd be required to disclose it all. It is a crushing debt that's coming to the next generation. And what we're doing to the next generation is we're denying our children and our grandchildren the blessings of liberty. In fact, we're denying them a Republican form of government. The most basic principle of a Republican form of government is no taxation without representation. 20 years from now, they're going to be paying taxes for spending that's already occurred. They have no discretion to say no to those taxes. They're mandatory taxes because the money's already been spent. That's an absolute denial of the very most basic principle in our country, is we have the right of Republican form of government. In fact, if you want to see the common theme of what's going wrong with our country, it's often this question, is who's making the decisions? We get so focused on the substance of the decisions at times, we lose track of the fact that the wrong people are making the decisions. When you have wrong people making decisions, you often get the wrong decisions. A friend of mine once told me that the goal of every committee is to rule the world. And that's true of the Student Council at Patrick Henry College. It's true of the Women's Ministry Committees, the Elder Boards, the City Council, the Supreme Court, the UN. Every committee wants to rule the world. And the drive in our country towards centralization is part and parcel of the drive toward socialism, the drive toward an immoral lifestyle for our country. And the solution is not to get better people to come run centralized government. We've tried that. When the Republicans have been in control of all three branches of the electoral branch of the federal government, the White House, the House, and the Senate, we've not done any better in terms of structural change. We simply slow the slide into the abyss a little bit. But centralization is continuing unabated. Now, this last week, I was testifying in the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee against the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. If we don't understand the threat that international law is bringing to our country and the threat that the Republicans like Barrasso and McCain are making friends with these, they're voting for this centralization. Not centralization merely at the federal level, but centralization at the international level. And what's being lost in that is state authority and state power. And if we don't understand that if we don't stop them structurally from having the ability to use treaty power to control the domestic policy of the United States, that's going to happen day in and day out. I led the charge last year by 5 votes. We defeated that treaty. It's coming up for a vote again because the left thinks they've got it wired this year. They think they can flip some Republicans who need spine transplants. And we have got to structurally not allow them to have that authority to make those kind of decisions. We need to take the power away from Washington, D.C. Here's what we can do if we have a convention of the states. That's the correct historical term, and it's the easiest to communicate. If you want to talk about this both accurately and with winsome communication, you talk about a convention of the states. Because it's not delegates that are meeting, it's states that are meeting. This is really a branch of recognition that states are sovereign entities. And when states meet, as they do at the United Nations, as any international conference, it's one state, one vote. That's the thing you need to know most about an Article 5 convention. It is one state, one vote. California can send 5, 6, 7, 9, 12, 15 delegates if they want. Virginia can do the same. Texas can do the same. Whatever they want. It's one state, one vote. You caucus within your delegation, you take a vote. It's one state, one vote. 26 states controls the convention. And if we can't figure out how, with Republicans in control of 27 state legislatures, Nebraska being officially nonpartisan is actually a Republican state, and with Republicans controlling one house of 5 other states, and the Democrats control the others, if we can't get 26 votes out of that kind of a situation, shame on us. We need to be able to do it. The legislatures control the process. But I want you to see what we can do. What we can do is not merely require a balanced budget amendment. I don't personally think that that's enough, because you can balance the budget with tax increases. At least you can attempt to balance the budget with tax increases. Even that would require some spending changes, some spending reductions. But what we really need is to practice what the Founding Fathers really intended for this country. And that's what I call the doctrine of exclusive jurisdiction. That means if the federal government can regulate it, the states can't. If the states can regulate it, the federal government can't. If the states can spend money on it, the federal government can't. If the federal government can spend money on it, the states can't. The Founding Fathers did not intend to give concurrent jurisdiction to anything. Anything. All issues were assigned to one level of government or the other. And so it's a real simple thing on spending. Can the states spend money on education? Yes. Can the federal government? No. Can the states spend money on roads? Yes. Can the federal government? Well, not except for postal roads, whatever that is, but not generally. Can the states spend money on welfare programs? Yes. Can the federal government? No, not constitutionally. And we just simply need to recalibrate the General Welfare Clause to mean what it originally meant. And that is, it's the rule I just laid out for you. It's the rule of exclusive jurisdiction. If the federal government can spend money on it, the states can't. If the states can spend money on it, the federal government can't. We need to have that rule.
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
Let the torch of freedom
All the entitlement programs, 100% of the entitlement programs that are going to bankrupt this country fall by the wayside if we reinstitute the proper meaning of the General Welfare Clause, that if the states can spend money on it, the federal government can't. The same thing is true of the Commerce Clause. Commerce Clause was intended to regulate one thing and only one thing: shipments. That's it. Shipments. The FAA, rivers, trains across state lines, the Greyhound bus lines, that sort of thing. Shipments. You know, Dionne Warwick's Trains and Boats and Planes. That was it. It was not babysitters' wages. It was not manufacturing. It was not mining. It was not agriculture. Everything that is wrong with this country in an economic oppression sense comes from a misuse of the Commerce Clause. We can get rid of the misuse of the Commerce Clause by a simple amendment clarifying what it really meant in the first place, and that is Congress has the authority to control shipments. That's it. Nothing more. These kind of changes are possible. Supreme Court is way out of line. Mark Levin has proposed a version of how to fix the Supreme Court. I've got another one. And what would happen at a convention, by the way, is you have all these subjects in the kind of convention that we're trying to call with the Convention of the States Project would be germane. Mark Levin's 11 amendments, 10 and a half of them would be germane at our convention. His property rights amendment would be germane, but only as it pertains to the federal government, not as it pertains to the state governments, because we're just focusing on the federal government's jurisdiction and power, not on the states at all, except for getting the feds out of the state's way. That's it.
Well, we're out of time today, folks. We're going to pick up right there on the panel tomorrow. You'll get the rest of this tomorrow and the next day. This is a three-part series from our Pro-Family Legislators Conference. This was our Article 5 panel, where we are discussing the pros and cons of a convention of states and exercising this authority under the Constitution for states to offer constitutional amendments that would be done at a convention of states and then, of course, have to be ratified by 38 states in order to actually make it into the Constitution. So very interesting discussion with Mike Ferris and with some of these state senators and representatives. You can find out more at our website, wallbuilderslive.com, and also at conventionofstates.com if you want to dive further into the issue. But don't forget, June 19th, we're going to have a live webinar with David Barton, Mike Ferris, and myself, Rick Green, and you're going to be able to ask questions during that webinar. So be sure and tune in for that as well. It'll be the evening of June 19th, 8 p.m. Central Time, 9 p.m. on the East Coast, 6 p.m. on the West Coast. To find out more, visit wallbuilderslive.com. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided.